So in our house, we like to play the occasional game, and this has really gone on pretty much since we've had kids, and even before that with my wife and I. But we had to learn when we did have children to play a different kind of game, especially when they were younger. Younger kids play Candyland and Chutes and Ladders and things like that. And I remember when my daughter was really young, we were playing a game of Candyland, and I won. And she was not particularly happy that I won. She kind of wanted to win herself, so we played again. And I won. And so we played again. And I won. And she was very not happy by that moment. And it was in that space so I had to think through, how do I explain to a 2-year-old that there's no way to win or lose a game of Candyland on purpose? That it's basically all chance. Because it is. Right? If you think about those sorts of kids' games, those games that we first learned to play, most of them don't involve any decision making at all. You just flip over the card and do what the card says, or you roll the dice and you do what the dice says, and that's really it. I think this is probably why, as we get older, we stop playing those games. We want to play games where we get a choice. Now, there are also games that are basically all choice, where there's no sense of luck and no sense of chance. You know, you move and then your opponent moves, and then you move and your opponent moves, and it's just this back and forth. In its most basic forms, you've got games like Connect 4 that are this way, and in some of its more advanced forms, you've got checkers and chess and the game of Go and all of those sorts of things. And in fact, these are known as a category of games, and they're known as solvable games, which means it's actually possible with enough time and enough energy to map out all possible scenarios for all possible games in all of the ways that they could possibly go. And for simpler games like Connect 4 and checkers, it's pretty basic. For more complex games like chess and Go, it's far more complicated. You need big computers to do it. But it is possible, because all those games is a series of decision after decision after decision, and there's really no chance, and there's no luck, or anything like that involved.
I'm so excited for this. I'm so excited. You guys take that. I'll take the dice out. And off the pencils. There you go, Sydney. There you go, Ashley. Okay.
Now, when I think about the games that I like to play today, games that I like to play now as an adult and play with my kids now that they're older, I think about games like Risk or Settlers of Catan or even Yahtzee, right? And all of those games have something in common, though you may not see it in the beginning. They all have this interesting mix of both choice. You've got to make decisions on where you put your pieces on the board. You got to make decisions about which dice you're going to roll, whatever it is. But there's also this element of luck. There's this element of chance. At the end of the day, who wins or loses a particular round, isn't necessarily going to be settled by the strategy of your game. It's going to be settled by the dice or the cards or the wheel. And it's that mix of skill and luck, that mix of choice and chance that I think makes those games so exciting. And I think they're exciting because that's really kind of how life is, isn't it? Doesn't life oftentimes feel like a mix of skill and luck, a mix of choice and chance? A mix of things that are in our control and a mix of things that seem completely out of our control.
I'm excited. We got 4.
That was
We
awesome.
got a full house. Look at that.
All right.
So you probably noticed that today's scripture is actually Genesis chapter 1, which is the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. This is literally the beginning, the thing that everything else will be built on. And Genesis chapter 1 is written in a particular style. It's written in the style of an epic creation poem. And so when we approach it, we should approach it in that way. We should approach it as a poem, which means it's there full of rich and deep metaphor, and it is an attempt to encapsulate some really important truths, probably some really, really big ideas in a way that the rest of us can comprehend. And it starts right off at the beginning when it talks about the earth, and it talks about creation in its most primitive state. In its most primitive state, we are told creation is a formless void. Now, that's how this translation translates it. Other translations translate those words differently. Eugene Peterson, in his version, The Message, translates, "Earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness, an inky blackness." And what we can kind of tell from that is that somehow this author is trying to communicate that whatever creation was in the beginning, it was almost undescribable, right? You get the sense of it was incredibly chaotic, right? It was there, but it was formless. Like it existed, but it didn't have structure to it. And so what does that mean for us today to think about the fact that the most primitive state of creation, the thing that God started with, was one of total chaos, where there was no form and there was no structure, and that everything was random all of the time.
Come on. Let's go, baby. Let's go. Go! Yeah, buddy. Okay, let's go. All right. Two more ones. Blow on it. Here we go.
Now God can't leave creation in that state, right? It wouldn't serve his purposes if he did. So God sets about this amazing task of ordering. And we see the first ordering that happens, this ordering of light and darkness. And if you keep reading, this is the first day. If you keep reading, there's a second day and a third day and a fourth day and a fifth day. And God continues to bring greater and greater order to the world. And he separates land and sea and water and sky. And then eventually we get different sorts of animals, and all culminating in this moment where we get us. And so we could be tempted to think, because God's creating act was to bring order to the chaos, that somehow maybe the chaos no longer exists. But I don't think you can take that from the story, and I certainly don't think you can take it from the story of the rest of the Bible. There definitely seems to be a continuation of chaos in the world. The truth is, creation, from its very beginning, was designed to be a mix of order and chaos, a mix of choice and chance. Now, in today's world, I imagine none of us need to be convinced that the universe is a mix of order and chaos by any means. We probably see it all around us. And it probably varies day by day about which feels stronger. Truthfully, in the short term, it's easier to see the choice, right? It's easier to go about your day and see the decisions you've made, and it's easier for us to imagine maybe what's going to happen tomorrow and the choices we are going to make tomorrow, and the ways that we, through our choices, can affect what tomorrow is going to be like. But the further down the road we go, right, the further into the future we look, the more chaotic it probably seems. The more it's harder to predict exactly what will happen. I have a decent idea what tomorrow is going to be like. I have a slightly less good idea what next week is going to look like. I'm not really sure I have any idea what next year is going to look like. And we all know that reality, and we all live in that reality. And what's interesting about our scripture today is it points to this fact that that's not just how we perceive reality, that's how it actually is. That is the world that we live in. And remember the grace and the companionship that God offers to us through not only the gifts of bread and wine, but through the gift of life itself.